Hey, so I wanted to talk about cognitive dissonance, which is where the narrative that the narcissist presents to you about what is reality is in conflict with how you actually perceive things to be. And this is where the confusion comes in, because part of you either wants to believe the narcissist version of things because that's more convenient for you, or you're somewhat forced to believe the narcissist version if you are a child in a situation and you just end up believing whatever your parents tell you because that's what children do. So what we're told about the world, for example, that our mother loves us or that our partner loves us, is in direct conflict with what we experience, which is that we feel extremely lonely, we are in pain, we have this like anger and resentment toward the partner because of the abuse, but then we're also suppressing it, so we don't really know why we're angry at the person, and basically we're just really confused and heartbroken, but then we're given the narrative that we are loved. So as children, what tends to happen is we just believe that the way that we're being treated is love. And this is part of what's really damaging about being raised in this environment, is that you essentially brainwash yourself into believing that the way you were raised was loving, because it's just so horrifying to face the idea that you were severely abused. So you make all these excuses for why you're feeling the way you feel and why you're afraid of your mother and why you hate being in the house. And I know for me, I just believe that like I was bad and wrong, so that like my pain was just like inherent in me and had nothing to do with the way that I was treated. But then at the same time, I also believed that my mother was hurting me because I was bad, and it was like her way of like trying to make me good. You can even see in the excuses that the excuses are almost contradictory to themselves as well. It's like, is she loving or is she abusing me because she loved me? Like, there's so much that doesn't make sense, and that is the cognitive dissonance, because there's like all these layers of lies that we're trying to make sense of, and we just pick different rationalizations and excuses based on how we can like best make it fit in the moment. And I know when I first heard about narcissistic abuse syndrome, I felt like I was living in like two parallel realities at that point. So it was like, on the one hand, I had all this information about narcissistic abuse syndrome, and I finally felt like sane for the first time in my life while I was reading that. But then I would phone my parents or see them or whatever, and then I'd be sucked right back into their narrative and their reality, and then I would forget all about narcissistic abuse syndrome and think like, oh, that can't be true, like of course my parents love me, and you're just like right back into that original paradigm, because it's so powerful when that's what you were raised with. And I like jostled those two kind of parallel worlds for like over 2 years, which was completely exhausting. Like, it was mental torture almost to be like learning about narcissistic abuse syndrome and like thinking like, oh yeah, that's totally what happened to me, and then you're like, no, that can't have happened to me, and it just keeps going back and forth. But over time, like slowly building my knowledge and my awareness of it and believing in it more and more, I was decreasing the amount of contact that I was having with my parents, and I was decreasing the amount of information that I was telling them. So even if I had contact, I was keeping certain aspects of my life private from them. And that was the first time in my life that I was exercising like any boundaries with them whatsoever, because I used to just tell them everything because that's what I was told I had to do as a child. Like, there was no privacy. So over those 2 years, I kept more and more information to myself and started to feel more confident in my ability to make decisions and my ability to like have my own life, basically. But I was still jumping between these two paradigms, and it wasn't until it just became so painful to hold both that I thought, okay, I have to say something. And then I finally did. I did say something, and that's kind of when everything fell apart, you know, because the abuse escalated, like the gaslighting escalated, like they pushed their narrative even harder. But ironically, that was what allowed me to actually see their dysfunction, because a normal person would not respond to having their child tell them they were abused by pushing the narrative even harder that they were loved. Like the reasonable response is just say, okay, let's talk about this, you know, instead of just completely shutting them out and dismissing everything they've said. So the only way the cognitive dissonance was mostly resolved was by talking to them about it, realizing that they're not behaving the way that normal healthy people behave, and then going no contact. And I would say that even now the cognitive dissonance still exists, because there's still so many like aspects to the narrative that the narcissist had of your reality that I think it can take a long time to maybe find like all the pieces of it. But definitely overall, in terms of doubting my own reality, like I feel so much more sane just not talking to people that constantly invalidate you and make you feel crazy. Like, it is them. There's a book called You're Not Crazy, It's Your Mother, and that's totally it. Like, their whole plan is to make you think that you're the crazy one. But then if you can just, you don't have to go no contact completely to realize this. Even if you go lower contact or just take a break for a month, 2 months, like whatever you're comfortable doing, just take a break from them, and then you'll probably feel way more sane not having someone constantly question you and invalidate you and make you feel guilty all the time. And then when you go back to interacting with that person, you'll notice that the cognitive dissonance will start up immediately afterwards. You'll start being like, oh, maybe I was wrong about them, and like they're not so bad. But immediately before you engaged with them, you were like so certain that they were, you know, abusive. So I would say that it's not something that can be resolved immediately. Like for me, it's taken a really long time. But I guess it also depends on like how tightly you're clinging to it. And certain beliefs might be easier to let go of than others. Like, for example, I'd always suspected that my mother was mentally ill. It was not that hard for me to realize that her behavior was inappropriate. But the belief that my father loved me was really hard to let go of. Like, to realize that he was the enabler and he failed to protect me, and that I can't trust him because he wasn't there for me. Like, that has been a lot harder for me to process. And I think self-compassion is something that narcissistic abuse victims are lacking, because we were not shown compassion. But that's actually what we really, really need during the recovery, is just to say, like, it's gonna be difficult and it's gonna be very, very exhausting, and your brain is gonna be struggling a lot to just figure out what the heck's going on. And you're also gonna be in emotional pain, and then the emotions might cause cognitive dissonance, and so it's kind of a big thing. But it unravels on its own, in my experience. Like, most of what we need to do is just validate ourselves and let the way we feel be the way that we feel, because the main trauma that we've had is just constantly being invalidated of our perception of the world and of how we feel about things. Like we're told that what we feel is wrong, or that our feelings don't exist or don't matter, and then we're taught that what we think is wrong also. So if you ever feel cognitive dissonance about a person, which is basically where you're just questioning what this person is actually about, that is a red flag that they're abusive. Because with a normal person, they will have good and bad qualities, but these won't be in conflict. So for example, someone could be really funny and that's a good quality, and then maybe they're really irresponsible with money and that's a bad quality. But those two ideas are not in conflict. That's not going to cause cognitive dissonance. This person has some good qualities and some bad qualities. But with a narcissist, their good quality is that they're like your best friend ever instantaneously, or like the best parent ever, or they're your soulmate, or they're the person that like really gets you, and they're so wonderful. And then their bad quality is that you feel super lonely around them, you feel really low self-esteem, you feel like ignored by them, or you feel like you're not good enough for them, or you just feel like really depressed or guilty after hanging out with them, and confusion, and you feel confused after hanging out with them because why am I feeling this way when they're the most wonderful person ever? So for the narcissist, their good qualities and their bad qualities can't be reconciled, and that's why it's considered cognitive dissonance, because you can't mesh together the ideas that they're perfect and wonderful and that you're extremely lonely in their presence. Those ideas don't fit together. So that was something that I just had to realize recently, is that with normal people, there's no mask that's preventing you from seeing all the pieces of who they are in a way that is not confusing. Like, the reason a narcissist is confusing is because they're intentionally creating this facade that covers up who they are. Like, what we notice when we're confused is this mask. Basically, there's some part of us saying, I can't reconcile the narrative you're giving me with how I experience reality. Like, that's basically the cognitive dissonance. So with normal people, they don't do that, at least not on a really large scale. Like, maybe they might do that with some aspects of their personality, because we're all in denial of some things about ourselves. But with the narcissist, it's really their entire personality that is a facade. So that's why it's so extreme. The cognitive dissonance is so extreme in that case, because really everything about them is in conflict with your experience of them. And yeah, so if you are experiencing this, I would just say to have patience with yourself, and journaling is really helpful to just figure out what exactly you're thinking. And I would say minimize or take a break of contact from the person you suspect to be a narcissist, and just see how you feel when you're not in contact with that person anymore, and then see how you feel when you talk to them again. And that will really help you kind of see like what is you and what is how you feel around that person, because the cognitive dissonance is really about them as opposed to being about there being something wrong with your brain. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. The problem is that what they're presenting is in conflict with reality. So the problem is really about them and not your ability to perceive reality. So thank you for watching.